Peter, the last time you were on our podcast was actually 8 months from this day on March 6th, when gold actually hit an all-time record high, $2,158. You see that right here. Now, at the time you came on my podcast, obviously you said keep buying, keep buying. And since that time, obviously gold has hit multiple new records high, going up about 24%. Respect to you, sir. You called it right. And before we really get into the debt and debauchery of the Federal Reserve and the fraudulent theory that the implicit guarantee the taxpayer can pay off bonds, I want to talk about what's happening today, one day after Trump was elected president, because the market, Peter, is going absolutely nuts. The 10-year is absolutely skyrocketing. On top of that, the Fed's supposed to meet tomorrow and cut rates about a quarter point. So, Peter, can you help articulate maybe what is the Fed thinking exactly?
Well, the Fed is in a really difficult position. They put themselves in it, unfortunately. They never should have cut rates at all, let alone by 50 basis points. And they shouldn't cut rates again, but they will. The inflation problem was never solved. The Fed never got tight enough. And now they're in a situation where Trump won the election, and he is going to deliver on his promise to have massive tax cuts. And so that is a highly inflationary fiscal policy, very stimulative demand wise. I don't believe there's going to be any substantive spending cuts. There may be some trivial cuts, here and there, but they will be dwarfed in comparison to the tax cuts. And even though Trump did promise tariffs, which will offset to some degree, the other tax cuts that he's going to probably get passed, it won't be nearly enough. And so the net effect is going to be a widening of an already wide deficit and a lot more upward pressure on long-term interest rates and consumer prices. And so, today the market is, just reacting. The dollar is way up based on all the extra growth that people think will come because of the, the stimulative type tax cuts and deregulation. Gold is down in response to a strong dollar, but also the idea that it's all risk on today. Everybody is buying risk assets, which would include things like Bitcoin. And so they're selling safe havens, which, treasuries, somebody consider those safe havens. I don't, gold. But I think the markets are, really don't get what's going to happen. And I don't think the honeymoon will last very long. I think at some point and sometime soon, rising bond yields are going to be a big problem for both the stock market and the economy, especially after the next rate cut. I mean, the Fed's probably going to cut rates tomorrow. If it doesn't, I think that's also bad for bonds, but it's obviously very bad for stocks. But then Trump is going to, go ballistic and claim that this is all political, right? He'll say that you're not cutting rates because I won. You're trying to, you would have helped Harris and Obama and Biden, but you're undermining me. And so it's going to just add fuel to the fire that Trump thinks that he needs to have more control over the Fed.
Peter, when I looked, because I knew I was talking to you, obviously I did some research on gold holdings by our government, right? And as far as I can tell, the government holds about 261 million troy ounces of gold. So 261 million ounces of gold. Now, when I overlap that, Peter, with just the unfunded liabilities, mostly Social Security, mostly Medicare, that equals $627,000 per ounce. That's just unfunded liabilities.
Yeah,
when I take only the national debt, because a lot of people are not even aware of the unfunded liabilities, when I take the 36 trillion in national debt, that's $137,000. $137,000 per ounce. It's at less than 2,700 right now. Now, the interesting thing, Peter, when we did the math on the total amount of taxpayers, 143 million, and we divide that into the unfunded liabilities and the debt, that's $1.1 million of tax debt per taxpayer. Absolutely shocking. When we look at the county level and we just do the school debt and the school bonds, which is kind of like the epicenter of massive bond fraud, in Denton County, we get $1.38 million per taxpayer. And really, my question to you is, I think it's obvious. How can gold and silver both, how can that not melt up? How can that not shoot up massively as the world wakes up to these facts?
Yeah, well, look, they're going to. I mean, your question is how can they not? Well, they will, right? That's the answer. You know, you're looking at all the debt that we have and comparing it to the taxpayers, which is the way you have to look at it, and it means that each American is on the hook for a tremendous amount of debt. Yet Donald Trump just got elected president by promising those same taxpayers who owe an enormous amount of money that they're going to get tax cuts. They need to be paying higher taxes to pay down that debt. They can't be let off the hook when we have a gigantic debt. He wants to exempt tips to let all the waiters and waitresses and bartenders and whoever else might start working for tips that they can have tax-free income. He wants to have no tax on overtime so that people could work overtime. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of monkeying around, however they do that. I mean, I don't know, let's say they define overtime as working more than 40 hours a week. People will probably take every other week off. I mean, they'll work really hard one week and they won't work at all, right? They want to try to get as much income as they can into the overtime. Only problem is the employers don't like paying overtime because they have to pay time and a half. So who knows? I mean, but there'll probably be a lot of arrangements that workers and employees could come to take advantage of that loophole and to
Yeah.
try, get as much of their income tax-free as they can. Trump also wants to make no taxes on Social Security benefits, which really amounts to a massive increase in Social Security spending. Because when people pay taxes on Social Security, they're basically giving back to the government some of their benefits. But if they don't have to return some of those benefits, that's the same thing as increasing Social Security benefits. Well, it's already broke. Social Security is already operating on a $100 billion plus annual deficit right now. And so this will just make the deficit that much bigger. So how can we do this, right? How can we give everybody tax cuts when taxes are already too low based on how much we're spending? And the spending is not going to go down, right? The spending is going to keep going up. It's on autopilot. The entitlements just keep going up every single year. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, interest on the debt keeps going up. National defense keeps going up. Trump's not going to cut any of those things. I don't care if we waste money on a Department of Efficiency. Who knows how much that department will cost? And even if we put Elon Musk in charge, there's not really that much he can do with the limited part of the budget that he can actually cut. But of course, it's not like when he made cuts at Twitter, because he owned Twitter, right? He didn't have 430 congressmen that had to vote those cuts. Ronald Reagan campaigned, in 1980 on getting rid of the Department of Energy, getting rid of the Department of Education, balancing the budget, lots of spending cuts. He didn't deliver on any of it. and he promised more cuts than Trump did. The only thing Reagan was able to do was cut taxes. And Trump's going to deliver on the tax cuts. I mean, Congress will go along with the tax cuts because they're popular.
But yeah, I mean, but to your point though, Peter, I mean, the tax cuts are nice, but it's not fixing the real issue here, which is the debt and reckless spending. And I guess my question for you is that one of the reasons why, and I want to throw this up for the viewers, China and Russia are looking towards an alternative finance system? I mean, is that a reason why maybe these Russia and China are moving to gold, or to try to put some type of collateral back to currency, because they know that the bond debt is out of control regardless of the, like, to your point, tax cuts?
Yes. And that's why today's dip in gold, this $70 drop, is going to get bought. The Chinese and everybody else they're going to react to this decline today, and they're going to be buying tonight, and they're going to be reacting to the strength of the dollar by selling dollars. Plus, not only are we going to run these massive deficits, I mean, more massive than the ones we've got now, but we're going to make them bigger with tax cuts. And we're going to impose tariffs on products that are imported from China, just pissing them off even more. Not that the Chinese are going to pay the tariffs, they just make their goods more expensive to Americans who have to pay the tariffs. But what that does is that means that they'll be able to sell fewer goods to Americans because Americans won't be able to afford to pay the higher prices, even though some Americans will have more income, right? Because they're going to get tax cuts. Not all Americans are going to get those big tax cuts. We're not all, working overtime, waiting tables for tips. The other tax cuts, I think, are relatively small, just extending the existing tax cuts relative to the price hikes that are going to be created by the tariffs. But we're going to be angering our trading partners even more with these tariffs and giving them a lower incentive to continue to hold on to U.S. dollars and U.S. treasuries. So, you're going to have massive selling of treasuries. I mean, that's why I think that the Fed is going to go back to QE. I've been saying that for a while. I mean, they're going to have to try to stop it. Otherwise, long-term interest rates, which are now, the 10-year is now almost back to 4.5. But I think, we could see a 5 handle on treasuries before Trump takes office in January. It's even possible that we see a 6 handle if we don't have QE. And, if the 10-year is at 6%, my guess is that mortgage rates will be 8-9%. That is a huge headwind for the economy. And I think credit card rates will keep going up. I mean, they're already almost 25%. One of the things Trump talked about was, price controls on credit card rates. But credit card, everything is going to go up. Trump promised so many things that he can't deliver because a lot of his promises are mutually exclusive.
They'll probably sell us, Peter. At least what I see possibly happen, some crisis is going to happen. Like you just said, they're going to lead to more quantitative easing, and it's going to lead to more bond debt. And with the help of my buddy Mitch Vexler, an absolute genius who's helped me a lot on the channel, we've studied all of this math, basically going back in a roundabout way to bond debt. And when we look at the bond debt, even on the local level, I mean, we see that there are still, let me throw this up for the viewers. We see municipalities are already defaulting. Schools are defaulting on bond debt already. And so, the probability of default and loss given default are so high because the implicit guarantee of the taxpayer is a fraudulent theory. The math says, Peter, when we really look at all of this bond debt, that and this is a math, a lot of people could do this differently, but the school bond debt, and don't get me started with these solar fraud projects, but the school bond debt could be 13 cents on the dollar. U.S. treasuries, everyone thinks it's safe, except for you, and I respected that, could be, when you look at the math, 30 cents on the dollar when it's not backed by a hard asset. Would you agree somewhat with that statement?
Well, I don't think that treasury debt is backed by the taxpayer at all. I mean, it should be in theory, but it's not, because look, we're cutting taxes when the taxpayers are knee deep in debt. We're reducing their taxes. What the debt is really backed by is the Fed and the Fed's ability to print money. But the problem is, the more money the Fed prints to back up that debt, the less the money is worth, and therefore the less the debt is worth, because the debt is only as good as the dollars that it's denominated in. And so, sure, the Fed could print all the money it wants, right, as many dollars as needed to pay down the national debt, which is about to hit 36 trillion. It may hit 36 trillion this week. It's just knocking on the door. And, Biden has already, in his term, and his term isn't over now for another few months, right? He's already run up the debt by more than Trump did. Now, Trump set a record for the most debt ever run up by a president in a single term. Biden already beat that record by, several hundred billion, and the term's not even over yet. Trump is going to break his own record and Biden's in his first term with these tax cuts. And there's also a good chance that the weak economy, remember, we're in really a recession right now. That's why Trump got elected, because the economy is so bad that the voters didn't want 4 more years. So they voted for Trump, because Trump agreed the economy is broken and I'm going to fix it. So he's inheriting a broken economy, but he's not going to fix it. You know, the only way to fix the economy would require a lot of sacrifice in the short run, a lot of austerity, a lot of short-term pain. He couldn't give a bunch of tax cuts. He'd have to cut spending. He'd have to cut entitlements. He'd have to do a lot of things that he promised not to do, which he will not do. You know, Trump basically promised electing him as a panacea. He said, just put me in office and I solve all the problems. And what did he say is going to solve the problems? We're going to cut taxes and we'll cut some regulations. We're going to drill, baby, drill. And we're going to have tariffs. He is not going to change that and say, you know what? I said all this stuff to get elected, but now that I'm here, I got to level with you. You know, I can't do any of that. Right? Trump's not going to do that. That's not, you know, what Trump is about. I know Elon Musk is the only one who you post about how, you know, we need some short-term sacrifice.
Right.
But that's not going to sell in the Trump administration. He doesn't want to accept responsibility for that because that's not what he just spent an entire year campaigning to deliver. And I don't see, look, he had a chance when he was president the first time. He had 4 years to do the right thing, and he did not do it. And, you know, why would he do it now?
Well, let me ask you this question, and I respect your opinion. You've been right a lot, and you've been a truth teller a lot. Now, I'm pretty sure we're on the same page of shutting down the Fed, locking it up, sending everyone to jail. But I mean, if you really were to sit down, is it possible to even wind this back? I mean, like maybe make a currency backed by collateral like gold? Is there any way to save us from this catastrophe?
There is a way to do it, but it's not easy. And there are a lot of people that make a living off of the system we've got. As bad as it is, there are people that live off the bubble. We've also created a phony economy that requires that bubble to exist. We also have a lot of people that are living off the government, and the government is living off this system of debt and inflation. So the government has made a lot of promises that in order to fix the economy, it has to break. And when it breaks those promises, the people who were promised something are going to be very, very upset that they don't get it. And so, you know, while there will be some instant winners, right? If we do the right thing, there will be some instant winners who will, you know, see a benefit immediately, right? So, but there will be a lot of people who suffer immediately. And the problem is the people who suffer are going to be better organized and more cohesive as groups. So politically, it's a non-starter, going to destroy your own career. And we know that the number one problem for all politicians is their own reelection, right? They're not there to help the country. They're there to help themselves. That's their job. Their job is to get reelected over and over and over again. And so they're going to do this. You know, I mean, I'm 61 years old. We've had a deficit problem, you know, since the 1970s. And almost every president until recently has promised to do something about the debt. And every Congress has enacted some gimmick that supposedly was going to put us on a sounder trajectory. And everything they've ever done has failed because they've never actually cut spending. Everything they've done in the past was about future cuts that never happen because they vote to cut spending in the future, not now when it counts, but at some point in the future when it doesn't count at all. By the time we get to that future, they've already voted to eliminate the cuts.
Well, isn't that called something like debt and debauchery? Isn't that how the fall of Rome happened? Multiple keystones taken out. No one could stop it. I mean, isn't that what we're saying here? We need someone to stop it first and to go against their career, cut people, right? I mean, so, you know, it's too late for that. Am I naive to think we can't stop the next fall of the US?
Again, it's not too late to solve the problems, but it is too late to solve them without a lot of short-term pain.
Yeah,
that is the problem, and so therefore the problems won't get solved. Trump is not going to do it, and even if Trump wanted to do it, Congress isn't going to go along with him. right? Because you got to get it passed. The Republicans have the Senate, but they don't have 60 votes, but they have the Senate. But I don't even know if they have the House. But if they do, it's going to be razor thin, right? But you're not going to
Yeah.
get enough Republicans to cut spending. You're going to get no Democrats to cut spending. And you may not even get all the Republicans, because a lot of Republicans have constituents that benefit from that spending. And they don't want to have to run for re-election 2 years from now and explain why they took away that program. So I don't think you get any real spending cuts through Congress. You will get tax cuts. Yeah, sure. Everybody could vote for those, and so you get bigger deficits. You get higher inflation. But Trump promised lower inflation. He's going to deliver higher inflation. Now, what's the Fed going to do? Inflation is moving up. It's supposed to start hiking rates. How's it going to hike rates when the economy is so fragile? When the markets are so fragile and so overpriced? More likely that the Fed is not going to hike rates, or maybe even cut rates as inflation is rising.
Let me put this by you. Man, you're setting me off, man. I mean, I'm getting so frustrated here because, I just want someone to tell the freaking truth that is at the top. Just someone at the top that spends what they have and that's honest. But is there a way to come up with maybe a Basel IV that puts a cap on the government spending? I mean, when we look at the GDP, the debt to GDP, it's like we're in a war. We're not even in a war. But can we do something to cap
Nobody
these
is
things?
going to pass it. Trump promised no cuts to Social Security, no cuts to Medicare, no cuts to Obamacare, increased defense spending.
Where does it lead us, Peter? It leads
We're
us
going to
into
have
a
a currency
depression.
crisis. We're going to have a debt crisis. Yes, it's going to be bad. And that's why it's important for people like me, or people who believe in the free market and capitalism, to be very critical of what this president is going to do.
Yes, sir.
Again, I would have been critical if Harris had won. I would have been very critical of Harris too, right? And I supported Trump knowing that he was going to do this stuff.
Yes.
But I know that Harris might have done even worse stuff. So that just because Trump is less bad than Harris, that by default doesn't make him good.
Less of two evils
about Trump that I like, but he's not going to diffuse this bomb, right? If anything, he's going to shorten that fuse, just like Harris would have. We are coming to the explosion here. That's why gold broke out this year. It's not an accident that gold went from 2,100 to almost 2,800. Gold was on track to have its best year since 1979. Now we'll see. It was a big setback today of $70. So we'll see if we end up not beating 1979, but we still might. We could recover this $70 drop by the end of the week. We'll see.
Well, can I get geopolitical on you maybe a little? Because we see other countries going to gold, and it's hard to get the most accurate information. But when we look at how much treasuries China owns, varying reports 770 billion, Japan owning 1 trillion. After they get those, Peter, they use that cash to lever up their closed economy, which is in trouble right now. They're suffering. Their own stimulus can't help them. Do you think that global debt crisis will be triggered by some type of cascading bond default that's not backed up by anything but paper? Do you think that?
I don't expect a default. I expect an inflation. So as the appetite for U.S. debt diminishes around the world, that puts more pressure on the Fed to buy the bonds that nobody wants. And where does the Fed get the money? It creates it, quantitative easing, it's inflation. So I expect the balance sheet to explode as the Fed starts buying more and more government securities, and as the existing debt matures, the holders are not going to want to roll it over. So the Fed's going to have to buy that. Plus, they're going to have to buy probably all of the $3 or $4 trillion or $5 trillion a year in debt. Right now, the government spends $7 trillion and collects $5 trillion.
Yes.
I'm sure that spending, let's say under Trump, it goes from 7 trillion to 7.5 or 8 trillion. And if taxes go from 5 trillion to 4.5 trillion, now you have a much bigger deficit. Who's going to lend us all that money? Just the Fed. But they don't have the money. They just print the money. And that's the inflation.
Peter, let me ask you how, I'm just a normal guy. I've had a bankruptcy, repo. I lost everything in the great global financial crisis, had a foreclosure. It's taken a long time for me to get everything back. And I sit back and I look at one set of data that I can't get over: median household income and the lack of that growth. And then when we leverage up debt on more debt and more debt and more debt, I keep asking the question, well, how could we not have a default if mom and pop can't afford to pay taxes, can't afford to live their life, and we have another round of inflation coming?
Yeah,
So
and it
it
actually would look worse if you adjusted those incomes for the actual increase in the cost of living, because the official government numbers don't even tell anywhere near the entire story. I mean, that's why inflation, the economy were the biggest issues on the voters' minds. It's not because the inflation problem has gone away. It's because it's here. It's persistent, and the data isn't capturing it by design.
Yes.
And again, that's the source of all the jobs. That's why so many jobs were reported as being created every month. These were part-time jobs for people that already had jobs but needed second and third incomes to pay the rising cost of living. So now you have a lot of people who are working 2 or 3 jobs that used to work one. And that's one of the reasons why they're so upset, because they don't want all those jobs. They would prefer one good job instead of 3 lousy jobs.
And time with family, not being a slave to paying off this bond debt. I mean, but I still, the more and more Americans go bankrupt, the more and more mom and pops close down restaurants, and the quantitative tightening hits them, and just the overwhelming amount of debt and taxes to pay the debt. I mean, how much longer does this whole thing last? Now, I know there's multiple levels, there's different people hedge, and I want to get to what people could do to protect themselves, Peter, but I still don't understand why the elites and the governments can think that they can continue to print and make things more expensive for mom and pop when we're already suffering.
Yeah, well, again, the government doesn't even acknowledge that their policies are the source of inflation. Kamala Harris, most of her campaign commercials were how she's going to go after the price gougers, right? Blaming greedy businesses for higher prices. But that's not the cause. But, Trump likes to blame, and other Republicans like to blame the inflation under Biden on the deficits under Biden. But we had massive deficits under Trump. Now, yes, those deficits didn't manifest in rising prices until after Trump left office. But had Trump been reelected, and maybe he was, and they cheated him, but had Trump been in office these last 4 years, we would still have a huge inflation problem. That was coming. It was already baked in the cake when Trump gave the baton to Biden. Yes, Biden made it worse, but there's a good chance that more stimulus would have been passed by Trump. I mean, Trump set the precedence for this policy. It was he wrote the playbook. Biden followed it, and just added a few more pages, but it was the same basic design: stimulate the economy with deficits and government spending, and let's send out checks to people.
And add a couple wars on top of that. That doesn't help things, does it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the wars, were bad, and for a number of reasons. I mean, one good thing that might happen, and one of the reasons I supported Trump, was that he may end these wars, and so people may not die that would otherwise have died. And I think we're going to be further away from going into a war ourselves. So it's not just the Ukrainians and the Russians who I would like to see not die, but I don't want Americans to die. So I think electing Trump means that's less likely to happen, right? And I'm happy about that. But the economic crisis is going to happen. Now, if we actually end the wars quickly, that could be a reduction in spending. It's not going to be a big enough reduction to stop the crisis, but it'll help. Because if we stop sending money to Ukraine, that's at least, something we can cut.
So we'll have some type of crisis. We'll have the next president in. More likely, they're going to do quantitative easing, printing. Do you expect inflation to become hyper as a result of the printing?
Well, eventually, that's where it's headed. It's the ability to avert that catastrophe continues to diminish over time as the problem gets bigger and bigger. The cost to avoid that outcome is greater and greater as well. But we'll see. As I said, one of the reasons I supported Trump is I do think that when we do have a crisis, dollar crashes, inflation, spirals, if things really start to get bad, then Trump might do the right thing. But that's because it's already horrible, right? So, like, if
Yes.
everything blows up
Yes.
and it's already a disaster, right? And it's way worse than when he came in, right? Because it's finally blown up, and he's the guy, here when it happens on his watch. Then he might do the right thing because he's already got a disaster on his hands. But I think he's not going to do anything to precipitate that. He's going to hope that he can have another 4 years of fake prosperity so he can get out of Dodge, and then the other guy will be the fall guy,
So, I mean, basically, when all's said and done, my children's children are bankrupt. My children's children owe money for my government spending right now. And so understanding the leveraging of the bond debt, the fact that mom and pops are already bankrupt. How do people leverage? I mean, my question, I've seen your career, Peter. You've successfully navigated turmoil that maybe no one else in the world could. No one else in the world could. You owned a bank. They tried to take that from you. You fought them.
They did take it. They didn't try. They took it. I just filed a lawsuit against them, but they already took it.
What can normal people do like me, limited assets? What can we do to protect ourselves from potential hyperinflation, depression? What can we do, Peter?
Yeah, it's not your grandchildren that I think are going to end up with the bag. It's your grandparents' grandchildren. It's you. It's this generation. It's the people around today, not the people who are yet to be born. Because people who are coming here in the future, they don't have to stay here to pay these taxes. We don't have walls around the country, at least not yet, to keep Americans in. You could leave, right? And you don't have to work. I mean, you could just decide that the tax burden is so high, you're just going to stay on welfare and stuff like that. You're not gonna, but why work? There's nothing left over for me. I'm paying it all in taxes. So we're not going to be able to get the money from the future generations. So, it's the current generations who think they're going to get the money who are going to lose, and they're going to lose to inflation. That's what's going to happen, right? The value of all this promised money that we were relying on future generations to pay us, it's going to blow up with inflation.
Right. They're going to say, nope. I mean, why would they, Peter? I mean, I'm having to work. You see it in the numbers yourself. You see people working 2-3 jobs to pay for property taxes from the overvaluation and the fraud. The schools are spending recklessly. Even you yourself are like, you're admitting it. You're telling the truth. Like, hey, you supported Trump, but unless they confront the problem, maybe amortize the debt down instead of moving it up and out, reverse of an amortization schedule, we're headed for a catastrophe. And maybe not a lot of people know what that looks like. My gosh, Peter, I mean, that's discouraging. That's discouraging.
Yeah, look, the one bit of good news is that Trump did win, right? I mean, as opposed to Harris, but he didn't win promising to do the right thing. He won with a bunch of candy and free gifts. He promised no pain and all gain. Nobody has to sacrifice anything. Everybody gets more. Everybody gets tax cuts. Everyone's going to get lower prices. Everyone's going to get cheap gas. Everyone's going to have this massive prosperity. The only people that are going to pay higher taxes are the Chinese. So yeah, I mean, that's why people voted for him. If Trump would have told the truth, he wouldn't have been elected. If he would have actually said what needs to be done. Now, the question is he going to pull the bait and switch, right? Is he going to say, I just told all these lies to get elected, but now here's the real deal, right? Here's the rest of the story. I don't think he's going to do that. That's not.
Well, that's not good, Peter. That means that we're just going to be in more debt, and then more bankruptcies, I honestly, it's so. I think the treasuries are in danger of default. It's just there's so much, and I know they're not transparent with the data. They're changing the data. You saw the savings rate. They just changed that. They're going to go back and change data. You know, I honestly think it's some possibilities. There's a potential for default in treasuries worse than commercial real estate bonds. What do you think about that?
The commercial real estate's a disaster. I mean, and rising interest rates are going to worsen the problem for commercial real estate. You know, and so I don't see any diffusing of that bomb. And you know, eventually
Yeah.
the residential real estate problem is going to blow up because mortgage rates are going to keep on going up, and it's going to be harder and harder to sustain the current price level. So you know, there's another crisis coming. Right now, the problem in the mortgage market is that you got so many people with adjustable rate mortgage, so many people with fixed rate mortgages, you know, with a 3 handle, that the people who own those mortgages, you know, they're underwater. They're losing a ton of money. And they're going to lose more money on those mortgages as rates go up. And it's going to put more pressure on banks. And more people are going to run to banks to yank out their money because they're still not paying anything. I don't even get 1/3% interest on the money I keep in my bank. So I hardly keep any money there. I go, if I keep cash, it's in a money market where I lend it to the government because the government will pay me, you know, 5%, 4.5%, 5%. The bank will pay me nothing. But as inflation gets worse and worse, that nothing becomes a bigger negative number, right? You have negative rates of interest on a bank account. So the banks are in trouble. They're all insolvent. We have a banking crisis. You know, we have a, you know, real estate crisis. I mean, a debt crisis, a dollar crisis. I mean, we got so many crises lined up as ridiculous.
And I just want to say, you know, well, I'm in Texas. All right, we're a disclosure state. Let me explain these homeowners, Peter. This is insane. This is a lot of Mitch Vexler and I have been digging into this. It's not just the interest rates. Some of these people are getting second jobs to afford their property taxes. I can pull up right now multiple properties that are listed actively on MLS. It's an active listing, been on the market 90 days, right? So it can't be sold. And the county, because there's so much bond debt and there's so much fraud, has overassessed their house by $100,000. So if they can't sell it for 300, it's assessed for 400. This is a pattern and practice throughout Texas. And so it shows me that the whole system, like you were alluding to earlier, is held together by fraud. And it also shows me like any math involved whatsoever with these municipalities and this bond repayment and to fix this problem, there is no math.
Yeah, and it's not just look at the homeowners insurance premiums. Look at how those things have skyrocketed, along with, you know, auto insurance. But you look at your utility bills, and maintenance costs. If something goes wrong and you need to fix something, how much do you have to pay for the parts and the material? How much more do you have to pay for the labor? You know, everything is more expensive. And of course, you know, if Trump does succeed in deporting a lot of illegals, you know, they're the ones that do a lot of that work around the house when something goes wrong and you get a construction crew and a contract comes in and they fix stuff, right? They're employing a lot of illegals. So they're not all just a bunch of criminals. There's a lot of them that are actually doing work that we need done. And then if they're not here, either won't be done or will be done at a much higher price, right? Trump says, hey, you know, we want to keep wages high for American workers, right? We want to protect them. We want tariffs. We want to kick out the immigrants. So American workers will earn more. Okay, well, that also means that American consumers and all workers are also consumers, but we're all going to pay more.
Yes, and the corporations that are already going bankrupt.
Cost.
Who's doing the math, Peter? Is no one doing the math? Let me end here.
Yeah.
Let me end here.
I mean,
man.
if you think about it, if everyone working at McDonald's is earning $25 an hour or $50 an hour, how much is a Big Mac going to cost? Right? I mean,
$100.
People forget about all that.
You know, everything you're saying, I can't help but just keep thinking it's the fall of Rome. It's the fall of Rome. You know, it's not going to happen overnight, but the fact that no one's doing anything about this, and there's multiple keystones in our economy and in our society that are not using math, fair math, and understanding that mom and pops have to pay for this. Mom and pops have to survive. We're 70% GDP. Makes me feel like it's unstoppable. A collapse is unstoppable.
It is like the fall of Rome, only at a faster pace, because the Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years. I mean, we're not even going to be close to that.
Wow.
And we're going to collapse faster than Rome.
Rome's currency was backed by gold. So maybe that's one of
No,
the
it
reasons.
wasn't back. They had money.
Okay.
It wasn't paper currency backed by
Right.
gold. Rome used real money. What they
Okay. Yeah.
did was
Yeah.
that they debased the money. They created inflation by taking their gold coins and putting base metals in there, like
Okay.
copper or nickel or other things like that. So they were inflating the money supply by
Rome.
debasing the money.
Rome did.
Yes, that's
I never. So they had their own inflation problem.
of course. How do you think that the Roman Senate ran up a lot of debt, and
Golly.
they didn't have enough money to pay the debt, and so they took their gold, melted it down, recast it. Right, they were able to make more coins with
And
less
diluted
gold in
it.
each coin. Right,
They
that
leveraged. They leveraged up their gold coins with other metals.
they
Oh my
inflated their
God.
money supply by debasing their money, and then prices rose. But Rome collapsed from debt and inflation. They were overextended. They couldn't afford the empire. They couldn't collect taxes, so they resorted to inflation. And the same thing is happening here. It's just, it's bigger. I mean, we're not bigger than Rome as far as our geopolitical territory. Maybe I don't know. Well, we have a big country, but we've got troops all around the world, right? That we can't afford to supply or maintain without going into debt, right? We have what looks like an empire, and it's
Empire.
funded by trade deficits and budget deficits and inflation, but it's getting harder and harder to maintain it. And the foreign countries who have been paying tribute to us in the form of the US dollar as the reserve currency and eating the other side of our trade deficits and stockpiling our IOUs, they're getting tired of doing this, and they're, going to revolt. They're in the process of doing that now.
Peter, I don't like any of that. Let me ask you this. Let's end here. We've been talking for about 40 minutes. Gold is coming off an all-time high. I mean, can you explain, do we still got room to purchase gold, given all of the inflation that is needed to sustain and tax cuts, which will increase the debt? I mean, do we got a lot more room in gold? Can we end? And I'm going to throw up this real quick to the viewers. Here's Peter's company right here. This is schiffgold.com. I told Peter he needs a Schiff coin. I don't know if he's going to do it, but Peter, is there still room to go here? Can you tell us whether or not it's still a good investment to invest in gold?
Look, first of all, gold doesn't move. It's the dollar that loses value. So when the country was started in 1789, first coinage act, the dollar was a weight of gold. And that's how it was defined, gold and silver. So you needed $20 to buy 1 ounce of gold. And that stayed the same for the first 130, 140 years of the country. It wasn't until 1933 when Roosevelt devalued the dollar, and then you needed $35, not 20, to buy 1 ounce of gold. Now, the ounce of gold was the same. It's just that you needed more depreciated dollars to buy the ounce. The price stayed at $35 an ounce, controlled by the government, up until 1970, when it started to rise a little bit and then a lot. And it went from $35 an ounce to $850. That was 1980. Now, it digested those gains, or the dollar digested those losses, and gold went sideways for 20 years. It broke out in 2001 when the Fed started slashing rates after the tech bubble burst. And we went to 1900 after the Fed started slashing rates after the real estate bubble burst. But then we went sideways from 1900 to 2000 for the next 12 or 13 years. We finally broke out of that consolidation this year. This is the beginning of the next big up leg in gold, which is really the beginning of the next down leg in the dollar, which I think is going to take gold well north of $10,000 an ounce. I mean, it could take it north of $20,000 an ounce. But it's not really gold going up. It's the value of the dollar and the euro and the yen and the pound and all these fiat currencies going down. So, yes, the dollar has a long way to fall. We've just started with the printing. And so the price of gold is going to go much, much higher. The price of silver is going to go much, much higher. So people should be calling Schiff Gold, going to our website right now, whenever they see this interview, and loading up their shopping cart and buying some gold and silver before the dollars lose more value, and you need a lot more of them to buy the same quantity of gold and silver. And if you have more substantial sums of money, you should also be divesting yourself of dollar denominated assets, particularly bonds, but also stocks, and moving internationally. You should contact my advisors at Euro Pacific Asset Management, europac.com, EUROPAC.com, and talk to my reps about how we can help you de-dollarize your portfolio, move to international stocks and that pay good dividends in foreign currencies. I also manage 5 mutual funds that you could buy no load at any discount broker. You can get information on all my funds on the Europac website as well at europac.com.
I got to ask you one more question. I don't want to do an injustice to my buddy Jeremy. He's like, my God, you didn't ask Peter this last time you were on here, Peter. Why you don't like crypto? Why you don't like crypto?
I don't
Give us the math
whole
on
new
that.
podcast. But look, I think I think crypto is fool's gold. I think it's it's just a Ponzi pyramid chain letter. There are a lot of ways to describe it. The only difference between this Ponzi or pyramid and ones that has preceded it is that it is dressed up for the internet age. It's on a blockchain and it's got tech behind it. And so it's made the story a lot sexier, but at the end of the day, it's the same story. It's based on the greater fool. You buy it and the anticipation is somebody else buys it at a higher price. And that's how you make money. Or in Bitcoin, they say you never sell your Bitcoin. You just buy it and hold it forever. And if everybody who buys it has that same mentality, then the supply of Bitcoin for sale gets smaller and smaller, and the price gets higher and higher. And everybody who's hodling it can operate under the delusion that they're rich. But it's all on paper. And the only money that is made in Bitcoin is money that's lost by somebody else. So it's basically a transfer of wealth from the people who buy Bitcoin to the people who are selling it. So if you come in and buy Bitcoin today, the person who's selling you their Bitcoin made money. And the only way you're going to make money is if you can find an even greater fool who's willing to return the favor for you. They've got to be willing to give you their money so that you can cash out. And now they're stuck, right? Hoping that they can find another guy, right? It's the same, it's like a Social Security Ponzi scheme, except the government doesn't force people to buy Bitcoin. They just have to be dumb enough to do it. With Social Security, you don't have a choice, right? They take the money from you, whether you want to participate or not. But forcing people to participate in a Ponzi doesn't mean it's going to work. It just means it will work longer before it collapses. But nobody is forced to get into Bitcoin. It's all just their own greed and ignorance, which, can be a powerful combination.
Well, Jeremy, there you have it. I asked Peter. Peter, it is always fun, sir. Thank you for your time. I'll make sure that all of your information is not only linked in the description, but also live links in this video. If you guys liked what Peter said, go check him out. And other than that, if you guys are just out there living your life or investing in real estate, we wish you luck and we hope you win.